You can't bat your eyes like I can. You got to practice. That takes practice. Batting your eyes. All right. The most challenging part of building any estimate is finding the right parts in stock and at the right price. Now, you could open a bunch of tabs, search each vendor's website, enter your customer's vehicle information, and compare pricing and availability. But if you're following the 300% rule, this can take up a lot of your time. That's why Lucas and I both use PartsTech at our shops. It's one website to see an unlimited number of parts and tire vendors. With one click, we can import parts and order them from multiple vendors all at once. And here's the best part. PartsTech is absolutely free to use, and your shop management system is probably already able to connect with it. To get started, just click the link in the show notes or go to partstech.com/podcast. That's partstech.com/podcast.
All right.
We do a safety inspection on vehicles.
Okay.
And we had a rash of specifically bearings. But there has been other items as well that, no joke, fail the next day.
Okay.
How do you handle these situations? We try to explain to the customer that their parts can fail without warning and that coincidences do exist. They're always suspicious. When we lifted the car, test drove it, returned their car, and they hear noise the next day. How do you handle that?
Gosh. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that there's any way that if it has a problem today, that it didn't have it yesterday, right? I personally believe there's got to be, and some of these things, right, ever since you don't have anything to do with. And you can usually genuinely tell. But if you've got a wheel bearing in a car that was not making noise the day before, and all of a sudden it's making noise. No, it was making noise before. I will tell you this, though. Rotating the tires or putting new tires on the car will cause the noise to change or cause the noise to seem like it moves. And so they may hear something they didn't hear before.
Yeah.
Right? And I will explain that, especially if it's an instance where we've rotated tires, we've done anything, steering, suspension, alignment, angle changes, anything like that. I'm going to talk to them about it. Me personally, if I feel like we've missed something, I didn't change the bearing to begin with. It's not my fault that it's bad.
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you handle it? What do you think the right answer is? Because, I didn't change the part to begin with. If the part's bad now, are they assuming that we've done something wrong that caused it to fail? Is that what he's getting at?
I think people get upset because they think if you gave me a clean bill of health and all of a sudden I have a problem, what the hell were you doing yesterday?
Yeah.
But at the same time, this one's a little easier for me because I can tell them, listen, I'm not going to try to sell you something if I don't think that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And we didn't hear that problem yesterday.
Yeah.
It's possible we may have missed it, but at the same time, would you prefer that I try to sell you something that you didn't need? Now, where it gets a little dicey is if they approve $3,000 worth of work and then the bearing fails a week later.
Guess who's putting a bearing in that car?
Guess who's eating that bearing? Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing too is I hired a guy from a chain, and this is the sketchiest chain in Kansas City, like bar none, the sketchiest chain. The guy wanted to get out of there because he's like, this place is sketchy. So I understand. What he does is he'll spin the tire and put his hand on the coil spring. And he'll spin the tire fast enough that if he feels a rumble in the coil spring, it's likely that bearing is on its way out.
Yeah.
And no joke, it works. It works.
Absolutely. I had an old timer teach me that years ago. It is.
Man, it is such
phenomenal.
a good, it's quick and easy. Now, if you wanted to get technical, like you could put the pulse
Noise
sensor on the wheel, and you can get, the reading from the front left, front right, so on and so forth. You can see that, hey, this pattern is different. This wheel bearing's on its way out. But that's the best way to find bearings. But if you didn't catch something, you need to stop and look at your process and say,
Agreed. Yep.
Was there a process problem in the way we handled this? So you don't want to have a leak that you missed, that all of a sudden it's like, hey, I've got drips on the ground. You just gave me a clean bill of health. What's going on?
Yeah.
You want to try to get good pictures.
Or you've just done work on the car, right? And that's the worst part is if you've done a major service, even if you've just done an oil service.
Yeah.
And something was missed, right? And that's why we do such a thorough DVI here is because we don't ever want it to come back that, hey, ever since you worked on my car. So that's the whole purpose. Like we all the time I'm asked, like, is the 300% rule just about selling stuff? No. It has nothing to do with selling stuff. I mean, you sell stuff as a result of it.
You
sell stuff as a result of it. But the reason that I'm so adamant about it in my shop, the reason that we have a policy about it in my shop has nothing to do with selling stuff. It is solely about making sure. And like my guys, dude, if they realize one went out without a valuation on it, they're like, oh man, that sucks. Right? Like, because now we know the door's open forever since you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the problem I have with it. And so I don't know. I mean, there's a couple schools of thought, right? And it comes back to something that Dutch and I have talked about in depth multiple times. And we've talked about, well, you know, is it ethical to pay for somebody to take a bad review down? Okay. Is it ethical to just give somebody who's upset with your business a refund so they'll stop fussing? Is it ethical to take, and that client came in and we say, well, we're gonna fix this for you because we missed it. Well, I didn't cause it to fail. Right? And if I clearly didn't cause it to fail, I've not changed the part in the past, there's no chance it could be under warranty. Am I just paying at this point to keep them from being mad at me? And if that's the case, is that devaluing our industry as a whole, right? Is that setting the standard that that's what to expect when you go into a shop? Because look at what the CSI score's done to the dealership world, right? Dan, that I was on a show for not Wrenchworks, but Wrenchway with Dan a while back. And that was one of the things that we talked about is how the CSI scores have affected the dealership's ability to effectively say to a client, I'm sorry, that's not us. I'm really sorry. I know it sucks, but and at what point do you say I have to be an expert communicator?
You cannot blame that on CSI scores. That's true of everything, everywhere. It doesn't matter. Like, look at restaurants. Mm-hmm. How many meals are they comping because the person doesn't like rosemary? They don't like rosemary. The meal showed up with more rosemary because that's how it's cooked. And they get upset. It's like, okay, I'm sorry you don't like rosemary. Like, how was I supposed to know? I'm not going to give you an ingredient list here. So what do? They comp the meal.
Please don't make me ever go eat somewhere that has rosemary in the food. I hate rosemary.
What's wrong with the rosemary? It's delicious.
It's just something about it. I just don't like it.
Yeah, my wife doesn't either. She hates it. If I put anything rosemary-ish anywhere near the food, she can tell.
See, that's why your wife and I can be such good friends, is because she's like me. Ranch is spicy, but it's good stuff, okay? And I mean, it's good food, right? Like, there's no reason to add complexity to all of this. But
they're comping the meal. It's not their fault. I hear where you're coming from. So next question is, then do we, at that point in time, say, well, I'm not going to do that in my business because it's worsening the condition of the way consumers view the auto repair industry. At what point do you say, hey, I'm not going to do that, right? Because that's what Dutch and I were talking about. Well, I'll give them this for free to keep them from fussing at me, but I won't give them their money back when I haven't done anything wrong. Well, right, and you're pretty hefty when it comes to like, hey, here's your money back, just leave me alone. And I think you're rubbing off on me because I'm telling you, like, I don't refund squat, and that's not a thing.
No, but you give parts away and you give labor away like nobody's business. Like something goes wrong and you'll like start just throwing money at the problem to see if it'll go away.
I will if I know it'll throw away. And I don't. Here's the thing. This is a me thing. I mean, I don't want to feel that I've slighted anyone.
Yeah.
And I don't want anyone to feel as though I've slighted them. For me to to stand my ground, draw the line in the sand, and say, dude, you are being unreasonable. They have to be unreasonable.
Yeah.
Most people will move one way or the other, depending on how you react to the situation. And if you did everything perfectly and they still come at you sideways, that's where I draw the line. And I say, dude, I'm not acquiescing here. I'm not going to roll over just because you want to come at me sideways. We did absolutely nothing wrong here.
Yeah.
But if we did something wrong, that's where you have to take a step back and you have to look at your process and you have to be a little self-reflective.
Yep.
And you have to decide, like, did I do something wrong here? Yes or no? If there is something legitimately that I've done wrong, and it could have been entirely unintentional.
So let me ask you this then. Is missing something in an evaluation doing something wrong?
If it was part of your evaluation and the service or the technician missed it because they were messing around, they were rushing, they didn't feel like it today,
they weren't getting paid for the evaluation.
Even if they hold on. I wouldn't even get into that because again,
I know.
You sign. Well, I'm saying, but you sign up for that.
Yeah,
so that's on you.
I'm just pointing out that was the conversation yesterday.
I know, but it was moot. It's moot because you've signed up for that.
I saw the facial expression as soon as I said it. You're like, oh, I can't believe he's done this.
Because it doesn't matter. Like if you've signed up to do the DVI and you don't follow through the process, or the process is inadequate, right? You've done a poor job of putting in the standard operating procedure to ensure that doesn't get missed, and it gets missed. Well, then you've done something wrong in the unspoken contract between you and the customer. The customer has every right to get upset. Now you need to make it right. So how do you make it right? Now, in this particular situation for this person, if they miss the wheel bearing, they've taken it on a test drive, and they've had enough of them, I'm taking a step back and going, how are we testing for wheel bearings here? Does it have to be so bad that it's loose before we catch it? Or are we doing the coil spring thing? And if we're catching it on the coil spring thing, then hey, if we can catch it this way, everybody needs to do it this way. Right. And then that becomes the standard operating procedure. Now we're not going to miss the wheel bearing as easily. Does that make sense?
Yep. It does. It does.
But there has to be self-reflection there.
Of course. And it always worries me when I see a poster say, well, it's not our fault, right? And I don't think he said that in that post by any means. But, if we approach it from the aspect from the get-go that it's not my fault, right?
Yeah.
I never approach it from it's not my fault. And if I catch myself saying, well, this isn't our fault because, I automatically stop right then and there and I pull back a little bit and I'm like, hey, you know what? I need to dig further into this. I need to truly understand what happened, because at the end of the day, if the client's not happy, there's likely something I've done, not my tech, not my advisor. I always try and self-reflect at that personal deep level. And then I can back up from there and figure out what I did wrong. But at least if I own it, I can prevent it from happening again. If I don't take ownership of it, right, I never, ever fix the problem because I'm always looking. And the service advisor thing taught me that, right? Because I think about some of the service advisors I've had, I held them to a higher standard than I held myself. And we've talked about that before. And so it taught me that if I'm automatically giving myself an out, automatically giving myself an excuse, that I'm not solving the problem. I'm just excusing the problem away. And I don't want to be the person that excuses problems away.
One thing that I have, that I pushed hard, I taught this to managers that worked underneath me. This is something that I realized early on when I was miserably failing as a manager. This realization made me stop and go, okay, this is the now the step forward. If I come to this, once I came to this realization, and that is you whenever there's a problem, you do three things. You do this every single time. Life gets way easier. The first thing is you go, this was my fault.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what the situation is. You say, this was my fault. The second step is looking at how was it your fault? Yep. How is this problem my fault? And that's the stuff for self realization or the self-assessment, right?
Yep.
Take a step back, figure out what you did wrong in the situation, because you'll find something you did wrong in almost every situation.
Of course,
right?
Even if it is everybody else's fault, you will still find something that's yours.
If you take those first two steps, and then the third step is, how can I prevent it from happening again? Yep. What steps can I take to keep it from happening again? If you do those three things as a manager, man, I'm telling you, I don't know how often managers failed. When I was at the parts stores, I saw it over and over and over again. The managers would fail because they would externalize all the problems. It was never their fault. It's like, oh, my staff didn't show up. They called in sick. They didn't do their jobs. I told them to do it. Yep. They didn't do it. It was always somebody else's problem. The customers aren't understanding. The customers aren't showing up. Yada yada, so on and so forth. And you can always slough off blame to something else, something external. But that doesn't help the problem. It doesn't fix anything. So the first step is internalizing it and then realizing, okay, how is it my fault? Now that I know how it's my fault, now I can actually take action. But the minute you start pushing it outside of you, you've lost all control.
Yeah.
And now nothing's getting fixed.
I have heard so many people who call it so many different things. Oh, it's humbling. It's this, it's that. When you take that type of ownership of it, no, it lifts a weight off of you. Right? Like it's almost a relief, and people are like, how can you say that? Like I'm recognizing it's my fault. Well, it's a relief because all of a sudden you recognize that you can fix it. And I think for so long we build this system and our mind almost protects itself because we're going in this circle of, well, it's not this, it's that. It's not this, it's that.
Counterintuitive.
It's this instead of that.
It's absolutely counterintuitive. Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden when we really say, hey, listen, this is my fault. Okay, what can I do to fix it? Andy Andrews, one of the things he said in that video was he said, listen, all these people come to me and say, help me solve my problems. I know you said in your book that persist without exception, but I'm thinking maybe this is the one time that we should probably just not persist because it's all over. And he's like, well, what have you done? And they said, well, I've done everything. And he says, well, if it was a perfect world and you could do anything in the world at all, what would you do? And they're like, well, I would do this and this and this, and I'd probably do that. And he's like, well, why don't you go do that? And they're like, okay. And a few weeks later, they call back and they're like, it worked. Yeah. Right? And it's like sometimes we get in our own head and we prevent ourselves from finding the solution or even using the solution because we're so convinced it's not our fault. And because it's not our fault, we shouldn't have to do anything about it. And I am a firm believer. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. We must take action. If you don't take action, nothing happens. Literally.